Ancient Egypt is like that one friend full of wild stories, except their tales stretch over 5,000 years. Consider this for a second. Cleopatra, the queen of drama and intrigue, lived closer to our time than to the founding of Egyptian civilization. Crazy, right? It's like thinking of her as ancient, but she's practically modern compared to how far back it all began. But here's the kicker. Over those thousands of years, the Egyptians weren't just building pyramids, crowning pharaohs, or making fancy eyeliner. They had some rituals and habits that would make you raise an eyebrow or both. Some of the stuff they considered normal back then. Let's say it's the kind of thing that would make us go, wait, they did what? Today, we will journey through creepy things that were normal in ancient Egypt. So buckle up, because the ancient Egypt you know is about to get much stranger than you ever imagined. But first, if you are a history lover and are joining us for the first time, kindly subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our other video. Let's get started. Ancient Egypt wasn't all about the majestic pyramids of Giza and royal pharaohs. Beneath that grandeur was a darker side, where punishments were as extreme as terrifying. One of the most brutal fates you could face, being burned alive. This wasn't reserved for minor offenses, but a punishment for the most serious crimes. Such crimes threatened the fabric of society and the divine order itself. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife was everything. Your soul could journey to eternal peace if you led a virtuous life. But being burned alive wasn't simply about ending a life. It was about erasing a person's soul. Fire in their belief system didn't just destroy the body. It obliterated the ka, the essence that lived on after death. If you were burned alive, you had no chance of an afterlife and no opportunity to join your ancestors in eternity. So what kind of crimes warranted such an extreme fate? Those who committed acts like grave robbing, sacrilege, or betrayal of the gods faced this horrific punishment. The Egyptians took the sanctity of their dead and their deities incredibly seriously. To dishonor them in any way wasn't just a crime against society, it was an attack on the divine. And for such violations, there was no forgiveness. The process of execution itself was a public spectacle. People gathered to witness the grim reminder that defying the gods had irreversible consequences. Imagine the fear of watching someone face such a fate, knowing that even the smallest infraction could lead to the same brutal end. It wasn't only about punishment, but a way to maintain control and warn anyone who dared challenge the sacred laws. In ancient Egypt, some families believed that the best way to show off status and beauty was by literally reshaping their male babies' skulls. You heard that deliberately molding a baby's head into an elongated shape was a sign of power and divine connection. So how did they pull this off? It all started when the baby was just a few weeks old. Back then, a baby's skull was soft and flexible, so parents would tightly bind their heads using cloth, wooden planks, or leather straps. This wasn't a quick process. It took months, even years, of constant pressure to stretch that skull into the desired shape. The result? A long, alien-like head that made them stand out from the crowd. But why go through all this trouble? In ancient Egyptian culture, a longer skull wasn't just for Circe. It was like a billboard screaming, "I'm special." Some believed it symbolized higher intelligence, or a closer connection to the gods. And let's be real, in a society obsessed with their deities, looking godlike was the ultimate flex. Of course, this wasn't something everyone did. The elite mostly practiced it. Those who wanted to flaunt their privilege in the most extreme way possible. You didn't need gold necklaces or fancy tombs when your head alone could scream, "I'm better than you." Now, imagine being one of these babies. You would have no say in the matter, just months of discomfort for a look you didn't ask for. But in ancient Egypt, this was normal. Parents believed they were giving their kids a head start in life. Pun intended. Archaeologists have uncovered these elongated skulls in Egyptian burial sites, and they're as fascinating as they are eerie. The practice wasn't unique to Egypt. Other ancient cultures like the Maya did it too. But it carried that signature blend of beauty, power, and divine mystique in Egypt. It's one of those practices that makes you grateful for modern norms. Sure, society still has its beauty standards, but at least your parents aren't out here reshaping your skull for clout. Or are they? In ancient Egypt, grief wasn't just a personal emotion, but an elaborate performance. Imagine losing someone close and having to hire a group of strangers to cry, scream, and wail on your behalf. Sounds bizarre. However, for the Egyptians, professional mourners were essential to a funeral. They were hired to elevate grief to dramatic, almost theatrical levels. These mourners didn't just shed tears. They unleashed gut-wrenching screams, rolled on the ground, and wailed so loudly that it seemed as if the heavens themselves were mourning. The more intense and dramatic their display, the more they honored the deceased. They tore at their clothes, smeared ashes on their faces, and beat their chests in a way that showed their deep sorrow. The performance was designed to make the loss feel as grand and significant as possible. But it wasn't just about the spectacle. These mourners had a crucial spiritual role. Their exaggerated mourning was believed to help guide the deceased's soul through the afterlife. The louder and more heartfelt their grief, the easier the soul's journey would be. It was like grief counseling, but with much more drama and intensity. Imagine a funeral where the mourner's cries are louder than the family's. It's unsettling, yet reveals how the Egyptians turned mourning into art. Hiring professional mourners wasn't just a tradition. It was a mark of status and a symbol of devotion. For modern sensibilities, renting sadness seems eerie. Justice in ancient Egypt was as much about faith as fairness. Forget lawyers and courtrooms. There were no trials or jury deliberations when someone was accused of a crime. Instead, the gods themselves decided on guilt or innocence, and the process was chilling, to say the least. One of the most common methods was the oath of innocence. The accused would swear on their lives that they were innocent, and divine retribution was sure to follow if they lied. But things took darker turn with the rituals they faced, rituals that could determine their fate in the most bizarre ways. Take, for example, the Nile River test. You might be thrown into the river if you were accused of theft. If you floated, the gods had declared you innocent. If you sank and drowned, what was the gods' way of confirming your guilt? Imagine the weight of that test, knowing your life depended on the river's mercy. But it didn't stop there. As divine intermediaries, temple priests played a terrifying role in determining guilt. They would interpret omens, signs, and visions, deciding the fate of the accused based on what the gods revealed to them. Your entire future, your freedom, could be in the hands of someone interpreting the gods' will. The stakes, higher than anything we could imagine today. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't the normal pets, you know. They were revered as divine protectors, guardians of the home, and symbols of the goddess Bastet, representing home, fertility, and protection. These majestic creatures weren't just part of the family. They held a sacred place in Egyptian society, which meant their death was treated with the utmost seriousness. When a beloved cat passed away, mourning went beyond the usual rituals. Forget simple tears. Egyptians mourned their cats by shaving off their eyebrows. Yes, you heard that right, eyebrows. Now, why eyebrows? The reason was deeply symbolic. Shaving off one's eyebrows was a visible, unmistakable way to show grief. It wasn't just a personal loss. It was a spiritual one. Cats were believed to have supernatural powers, from warding off evil spirits to protecting their owners from disease. Their bond with Bastet elevated them to divine status. So the death of a cat was considered a cosmic event that required a significant public display of mourning. Shaving eyebrows wasn't just a quirky tradition, but a mark of respect and reverence for these sacred creatures. Until their eyebrows grew back, anyone who saw the grieving person knew they were in mourning. It was a highly visible sign of sorrow that couldn't be hidden or ignored. It wasn't just about losing a pet, but about acknowledging the profound connection between humans and cats, which transcended the earthly and touched on the divine. In a culture where cats were worshipped as protectors and divine beings, losing one was seen as a personal and spiritual tragedy. Today, shaving our eyebrows for a pet may seem strange or extreme, but for the ancient Egyptians, it was a sacred and intimate gesture, a true reflection of how deeply they honored their beloved cats. In ancient Egypt, killing a cat wasn't merely a crime. It was considered an unforgivable act and a direct insult to the divine. Cats held such sacred status that even accidentally harming one could result in a death sentence. Yes, you heard correct. The penalty for killing a cat could be nothing short of execution. The deep reverence Egyptians had for cats was tied to their spiritual beliefs. These animals weren't viewed as simple companions. They were seen as divine protectors, living representations of the goddess Bastet, who symbolized home, fertility, and protection. To harm a cat was essentially to offend the goddess herself, an offense no one could escape from. This belief was so ingrained in Egyptian society that even the slightest harm to a cat was met with overwhelming punishment. There are historical accounts of riots erupting over the death of a single cat. One such story involves a Roman visitor in Egypt who accidentally killed a cat. His high social status didn't shield him from the wrath of the locals. His actions caused such outrage that the Egyptians would not forgive him, showing how deeply they valued the lives of these sacred creatures. In times of war, the reverence for cats went even further. During battles, it's said that Egyptian soldiers would refuse to harm cats, even if they were used as shields by enemy forces. The thought of harming these sacred beings was so abhorrent that it could render a soldier completely paralyzed in battle, choosing their spiritual beliefs over everything else. Ancient Egyptian justice had this dark, brutal side that would make modern interrogation techniques seem like child's play. Forget about gathering evidence or presenting a case in court. In Egypt, the police had a much simpler method for getting to the truth. They beat confessions out of suspects. The authorities regularly subjected suspects to severe whippings and beatings, pressing them into admitting guilt or implicating others. This practice wasn't reserved for hardened criminals either. People accused of even minor offenses faced the same violent treatment. The belief was that physical punishment would force the truth to surface, regardless of the accused's guilt. It wasn't only the suspect who bore the brunt of this abuse. Witnesses and anyone connected to the case were often dragged into the process. The goal wasn't justice, fairness, or even truth. It was about making sure someone took the fall. In this system, confessions were considered binding, no matter how obtained. The tools used in these brutal interrogations were as primitive as they were effective. Sticks, whips, and other implements left deep, painful marks, often serving as lasting reminders of the trauma endured. The physical scars were not just evidence of the punishment, but a symbol of the fear and authoritarian control that permeated every aspect of Egyptian life. This harsh approach to law enforcement paints a chilling picture of the society's inner workings. While ancient Egypt was a land of monumental art, architecture, and medical achievements, Its justice treatment was rooted in fear and intimidation. The truth became secondary to surviving the terrifying ordeal for those accused. The cruelty behind these practices reveals just how authoritarian the legal system was, where the threat of pain and humiliation ruled over any sense of fairness or due process. Picture this: you step into a temple, hoping to find a quiet spot to pray, only to spot a crocodile lounging nearby, unbothered. It's a nightmare for some, but this was a reality in ancient Egypt. Crocodiles weren't just lurking dangers. They were revered as gods, worshipped as the mighty Sobek, the crocodile god of fertility and protection. These fearsome reptiles were seen as the guardians of life and death. Sobek wasn't just any god. He was thought to control the life-giving waters of the Nile, ensuring the land's fertility and the people's safety. So these crocodiles weren't just animals. They were living symbols of divine power, almost treated like royalty. In the temples dedicated to Sobek, they were pampered like gods themselves. Priests fed them more lavish meals than many Egyptians ate, and they adorned them with gold and jewels to celebrate their celestial status. When these sacred crocodiles died, their journey didn't end. They were mummified and buried with all the reverence reserved for kings, as if they too were chosen by the gods. But here's where things get a little eerie. These creatures weren't always docile. Priests and visitors had to tread carefully through the temples, constantly aware of the powerful predators lounging in their midst. Can you imagine trying to pray while a crocodile casually wanders by? The creepiest part? Some of these crocodiles were allowed to roam free, blending the divine with the deadly. For the ancient Egyptians, sharing their sacred spaces with these creatures was a way of showing deep faith and respect for Sobek. But today, just thinking about it might make you shiver. Would you dare worship in a temple crawling with crocodiles? When people think of ancient Egypt, mummies often come to mind. But mummification wasn't just spooky. It was a gruesome ritual to ensure a smooth journey into the afterlife. This process wasn't merely wrapping a body in linen. It involved some bizarre steps, turning it into an elaborate, almost grotesque, preservation ceremony. It all began with the embalming. The first task was to remove the brain, which was done using a hooked tool inserted through the nose. Yes, through the nose. The brain wasn't considered important for the afterlife, so it was discarded. Next up was an incision in the abdomen to remove the internal organs. These organs were cleaned, dried, and carefully placed into canopic jars, often adorned with the heads of gods to protect them. But here's where it gets more interesting. The heart, unlike the other organs, stayed in place. Ancient Egyptians believed the heart was the center of intelligence and emotion. This was crucial for the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased's heart was weighed against a feather to determine their fate in the afterlife. The person was granted a peaceful passage to paradise if the heart was lighter than the feather. Once the body was emptied, it was stuffed with natron, a natural salt, to dry it out completely. After about 40 days, the body was carefully wrapped in linen, layer after layer. Each layer was sealed with resin, ensuring everything stayed intact. Amulets were placed between the layers to protect the body from harm in the afterlife. For the Egyptians, mummification wasn't just about preserving the body. It was a sacred act to ensure the soul's journey into eternity. But for us today, the process seems deeply eerie and a little unsettling, highlighting their obsession with conquering death and securing immortality. Ancient Egyptian medicine was a fascinating mix of surprising ingenuity and, at times, unsettling practices. One of the most bizarre and surprisingly effective treatments involved dressing wounds with moldy bread. At first glance, it sounds like a surefire way to worsen an injury. Yet the Egyptians stumbled upon a form of medicine ahead of its time. When someone in ancient Egypt suffered a cutter wound, their healers would apply moldy bread directly to the injury. Modern minds would think of this as an open invitation for infection. Still, the Egyptians didn't realize they were using a natural antibiotic. The mold contained compounds similar to what we now recognize as penicillin. This discovery wouldn't be made until thousands of years later. So, in an eerie twist of fate, they unknowingly harnessed the power of mold to promote healing. The process wasn't exactly sterile by today's standards. The bread wasn't prepared or sanitized. It was just the moldy loaf that happened to be available. Healers combined it with other substances like honey or resin to create a paste. This concoction was believed to help ward off infection, seal the wound, and allow it to heal more effectively. However, let's not forget that Egyptian medicine was also deeply tied to their spiritual beliefs. Alongside these practical treatments, healers often chant prayers and recite spells, convinced that curses or evil spirits cause many illnesses or injuries. This blend of practical remedies and spiritual rituals paints a picture of a culture where science and religion were intertwined, and medical care was as much about appeasing the gods as it was about physical healing. While it's incredible that the Egyptians managed to tap into the healing properties of mold, something that wouldn't be fully understood until much later, the idea of having moldy bread smeared onto a fresh wound still feels unsettling today. It serves as a chilling reminder of how resourceful and, at times, eerie ancient medical practices could be, blending the boundaries of superstition and science in ways we might never have expected. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a land of pharaohs and pyramids, but a world of bizarre and creepy practices. History is full of surprises, and this ancient civilization proves that truth is often stranger than fiction. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.